Welcome back, viewers. We're still here in the scope, and in this segment, as I promised earlier, we're going to be discussing another topic, and this coming out of 2018 as a whole. This was supposed to be a year of progress on hunger, poverty, and inequality, yet it can be argued that even through the advancements humanity has made in other regards, these key areas holding so many back remain unresolved seemingly and do not appear on many priority lists. With exorbitant CEO salaries, for example, growing poverty due to government inaction, war, corruption, and ensuing hunger, what hope is there going forward? To discuss these and other topics, we're joined here in the studio by Mr. Omar Malik, who is a policy analyst with the UNDP. Thank you for taking time out and coming in here into the studios to join us. And we're also joined on the line by Ms. Waqar Rizvi, who's a social activist, and she's joining us live from London. And she's the founder of the Project Zainab charity in the UK. Thank you both again for joining us. So, Omar, I'll start with you if I may. Just give us an overview about your opinion, because I know you've worked in this field for a significant amount of time. What do you make of progress or lack of when it comes to dealing with poverty, inequality, etc.?
Thank you, Waqar. Basically, my understanding is if you're talking about poverty and inequality, they run simultaneously, in sync with one another. In food security, you can talk also, you can link it to food security. But all these poverty, inequality, and food security, these dimensions would not change significantly. It's a time-long trend. It doesn't happen over a period, significant period of time. So in my opinion, in Pakistan's context, poverty trends have been on a declining. So poverty has been an improving trend in Pakistan. You see poverty has declined from if you're talking about head count, it has declined from 34.6% back in 2000, and then recently it's been 9.3%. So historically it has been going poverty has been declining in Pakistan. But when we talk about inequality, I think that's an area of main concern for Pakistan. And when I'm talking about inequality, I'm not only talking about income inequality. I'm talking about diverse set of inequality. Be it in our economic lingo call it inequality of opportunities, where income is just one component of inequality, and there is inequality in education, there's inequality in health, and also there's a regional dynamics to it as well. You're talking about regions that are secluded from development progress. Yeah. So when you look at poverty and inequality dynamics in Pakistan, you're talking about a declining trend in poverty, but in terms of income inequality and inequality in its wider domain, we see inequality has increased in Pakistan. So there are regions who are doing relatively better off than the regions that are lagging behind in development progress. And again, as I've said, it's not income only. It's about other opportunities to life. So from a human development perspective, when we're talking about poverty, inequality, and development, we are looking at a broader domain. We were talking about providing opportunities to the people to come out of the poverty trap. Right. So just to conclude and summarize, Pakistan has done well in terms of poverty over historically. And in terms of inequality, I think that's a grave area where there's need to be more policy focus from various stakeholders. Coming to food security now, I think in Pakistan's context, when you look at food security, there are two aspects to look at food security. One is food availability, which largely comes from the production component of it. And then there is excess. Yeah. So availability, in my personal opinion, it's not a major issue in context of Pakistan at this point in time. Maybe in future, concerning water insecurity issues and rising population, it could come up to be a major grave challenge. But at this point in time, to me, in terms of food insecurity, it's more about excess. Okay. And when I'm talking about excess, I'm talking about income, people having the buying capacity to procure goods and services. I'm talking about purchasing power, where the inflation aspect would come in. Pakistan has historically done well in terms of reducing inflation for the past 10 years. It has been below 5%, but gradually in 2018, inflation has started to pick up. It has gone to 7%, and with the current trends, it might go up as well. So, but major issue, apart from inflation and purchasing power, it's more about market interlinkages. Does the produce reach the markets? And then do the people who want to buy those products have the purchasing power to buy those? Yeah. So I think that's the focus where the government needs to focus in terms of food security, ensuring that there is sufficient access. Pakistan has done well again with regard to social safety net program, which is another component which ensures there is access of people to agriculture products. So I think that's in terms of
and I'm glad you brought a lot of that up, Omar, because Ruhi, I imagine it can be argued, even from the UK standpoint, that a lot of the things that Omar there mentioned are essentially very global issues. Just give us the UK perspective if you can, because I know you've been involved in charity for a significant while as well. What is your perspective from the UK on these issues?
And all those other aspects of inequality would be the fact that because of the inequality, that there is a rising trend in poverty. We tend to have a lot more underprivileged people now that we never ever had to see in the 70s. Now we've reached 2018. Just looking at 2018, we just heard figures of homeless persons or people who are requiring, social housing here in the UK. That's gone up by 20,000 now. 20,000 people are actually waiting to be housed. Can you imagine the homeless people on the streets? Well, that's all because of inequality. Inequality came into recognition because there were changes that were happening with the welfare benefit system last year and the year before, in where the benefit system took a major leap, changing everything and broadening everything into under one aspect of universal credits. Now, once we look at that, we see that there are so many people, disabled people, people who are underprivileged in terms of their gains in poverty, people who are sick, people who are coming out of work, people are unemployed. Those kinds of people were trying to find themselves a place as to where they can fit in with this universal credit. Right. They've had to wait long periods of time. This is where the inequality has risen, where they have not fitted in, because the UK decided to bring in private systems to actually take hold and use them to actually assess people. This kind of system is very, very unequal in its terms. It's caused because there's a lot of diversity in a lot of people's situations. We find that, poverty, I think, is going to take a huge rise. I'm not a skeptic, but I do believe that there are so many things that could happen with the UK at this present moment in time. And there are a lot of challenges a lot of people are facing.
When we're talking about this global issue, if I may stretch just from Pakistan outwards, as Ruhi there mentioned, we talk always about government policies. But when it comes to inequality, can we argue that a lot of this goes back to the private sector too, doesn't it? Where the government doesn't have as much to do, or the government possibly should have more to do with that. Where does your opinion and where do your sentiments lie when it comes to that argument?
See, when talking about, again, poverty, inequality, and food security combined together, I think government's role is to provide a direction to it, right? Okay. It's more about private sector. Development in this context is when we are working on sustainable development goals, which is a global development agenda, we are, on our part, are envisaging a significant role of the private sector. Government's role is to be a facilitator. The private sector is a major driver. When you're talking about issues like unemployment, as Ruhi mentioned, housing sector, there's a significant role that the private sector can play, not purely from as a philanthropy, but more about from core business practices. If you want to generate employment of that sort, you would need private sector to be a major player to generate those employment. When you want to house a large number of population, again, government solely on its own cannot provide. Pakistan has witnessed a significant government's contribution towards developing housing infrastructure. But I think it's more about private sector that needs to come into the foray, because there is a lot of private investment that needs to go into it. There's a lot of private dividends that could be yielded in terms of profits. So I think private sector has to be part and parcel of the development process. But then the facilitating environment of how to engage the private sector depends on how the government would design its policies, its plans. So government's role is more to be a facilitator in this context and let the private sector explore avenues where private sector can come in and contribute. And again, as Ruhi mentioned, unemployment, housing sector, there's loads of channels where private sector can contribute as in terms of their core business practices. So I think there's a significant role of the private sector, and I think it's not only in globally, but in Pakistan as well, where private sector now has to come to the foray and be part and parcel of the development progress in Pakistan.
Very well. Let me add another voice to this conversation. We're joined by Mr. Abdul Wadud, who is an activist, and he's joining us live now from Kuwait. He is the CEO of Seher, which is a society for empowering human resource. Abdul Wadud, thank you for joining us here in The Scope. I wanted to get your opinion about inequality as a whole, of course, as you've seen it, as well as poverty and the effects that has.
Thank you very much for taking me in your program. Poverty is basically a multi-dimensional issue. Conventionally, it has been only looked into the economic poverty, but poverty as a multi-dimensional issues. It is a powerlessness. It is a keeping away the people from the resources. It is a strategies which keeps the people deprived from their basic needs. if you just look into the landscape of Balochistan, almost 72% of the people are deprived from the basic needs. And they are very vulnerable and exposed to all kind of problem they are facing. And people are living far-flung. The terrain is so difficult. The social safety nets does not exist. People are living on their own. Infrastructure is basically not available. People are not having the health facilities to be reached. So if you just take the per capita of the Balochistan people, it is even less than the number Pakistan is giving. It is almost $1. Nowadays, internationally, it is less than $2. But in Balochistan, if you just look into the situation, that is less than $1 even. The people are starving. Drinking water is not available. If you just go to the figures, one of the area which I would like to mention, because this is a national media, and through your media I would like to communicate one thing. Those who are basically calculating and they are collecting the figures of poverty analysis, they are ranking the provinces and the district in the, that is so ironical. Sometimes they are taking the RCD roads and they say Balochistan is a prosperous province. Yes, because we are 44.7% of Pakistan. If you just take the one road from the Zob to the Gwadar, it means we are the richest province of the Pakistan. And ironically...
So I wanted to pick up on that point you just made there, Abdul, because it's an important, I think, which is a global issue as well, actually. Ruhi, when we're talking about statistics, and I don't want to get too deep into that because I don't want to bore viewers with just statistics, but do you think it's important, Ruhi, and I imagine you would agree that it is important to have the correct context on the part of government agencies throughout the world? You can talk about the UK, for example, when they contextualize this issue of poverty, inequality, hunger, as it stands right now?
It's down to, I think it, I mean, you know, we have the UNESCO, you have the UNHCR, you have the World Health Organization. I think everybody needs to play a role in, you know, contextualizing the exact problem that is actually affecting the whole global population. It seems to be a lack of awareness about where the actual problem lies. I think everybody seems to be passing the buck when it comes to that situation, or either they dismiss it because they feel it's not their stronghold, or they don't think that they can recognize these issues and actually use them in their statistics. I think statistics should actually, take into consideration the fact that even in UK, we have so much poverty. It's unbelievable when you see these young people, who cannot make it to university after school. They're going into apprenticeships, and if they're dropping out, they're still seen as adults. The age situation is also a problem, because in one aspect, the age concern that we would have is that young people be seen as adults as soon as they turn to 18. But in some areas, an 18-age-old person wouldn't have access to some of the benefits, or the government welfare is actually, mating out to other people. Now, you've got the young people who cannot make it to getting themselves on the housing ladder. You've got the older people who are suffering because there's disparity between the age concern groups, and then you've got the disability groups. So there's not enough resources to actually look after all the needs of all the people. And I think when we're talking about contextualization, I think global concern needs to be something that recognizes the disabled people, the underprivileged people, and the elderly people. I think these are the three groups that are missing out on, missing out because their needs are not being met. And I think who's responsible for that are the main organizations who never ever actually look at the concerns of these very, very underprivileged people.
Okay, so Omar, I wanted to, for a moment, put you on the spot, and I just want to let our viewers know you're not speaking on behalf of the United Nations Development Agency, but I just wanted to, if I may, get your opinion on that, because the UN or other such large organizations are pinpointed and fingers point at them and say, listen, you should be doing more. But obviously, we can understand the UN's point of view where it's like, we have our resources stretched. There is only so much that we can be doing. But do you think when we're talking about this argument of statistics and contextualizing this issue of poverty and inequality, how important is that to possibly convince the world that, listen, it needs to be doing more as a united world?
Waqar, but just before answering to this question,
Sure.
I want to build on what Wadud and Ruhi said.
Sure.
See, there's two ways how do you look at Maya poverty, right? That's a totally different question. So if you're measuring poverty purely in terms of income, you'll get a different statistics.
Yep.
Then you also need to focus on drivers of poverty.
Okay.
In the context of Pakistan, when talking about, and that goes for global as well. In 2016, the government of Pakistan for the first time released a multi-dimensional poverty index.
Right.
So beyond income, they wanted to see what derives poverty in Pakistan. And they realized it's more about education, about health, about standards of living. So because income is just one component. If you have better income, it could be possible that you have a better standard of living, but it could be likely that you might not have a better standard of living. So the sort of houses you are living in, the sort of infrastructure you have in your houses, the sort of other necessary resources, ingredients to life that you have in. So that basically derives the poverty element in Pakistan. And that goes for globally. So globally, UN produced a global human development index, which it's one way to look at poverty dynamics as well, where income is one component, and then income is contribute apart from income, there's education and health, which they look at. And now coming to Pakistan's dimension, when we compare Pakistan, at least to the regional countries, we see Pakistan over the period of time, despite an increase in human development index, they are not doing well on education and on health indicators. So that's what the UN in Pakistan would be wanting to advocate to the government to look more into the drivers of poverty in Pakistan and see what needs to be done. So government of Pakistan, as I said, in 2016 produced this multi-dimensional poverty index, where they not only looked at poverty from just from an income angle, but also from a diverse lens in terms of education and health. But the value added this report of government of Pakistan provided was to divide Pakistan's poverty element into across all the districts of Pakistan and see how each district of Pakistan is doing in terms of multidimensional poverty, so that you can make targeted interventions. It could be likely, as Wadud mentioned, Balochistan is not doing well in terms of in multidimensional poverty, and there are many districts of Balochistan, in fact, that lies below the threshold of poverty. Similarly, there are regions in Punjab that are doing relatively much better in terms of multidimensional poverty, and there are others that are not doing much. And if you look at Human Development Index of Pakistan, you would realize that there are some districts who are doing relatively as good as the most advanced economies across the world, whereas there are certain districts in Pakistan who are doing in terms of human development as poorly as those lying.
If I may, I do apologize for interrupting. We're running out of time, so I wanted to go back and see if I can get to our guest who's joining us live now from Chennai, Professor Andrew Sassuraj. Andrew, I'll ask my question again that I'd put to you earlier, Andrew. Just put us into context, if you can, about the situation in India. Because this issue, of course, of hunger and inequality and poverty is a global issue, of course. But just tell us, what's the situation like in India? I know that you've worked with children a lot, and that's been your focus.
In India, when it compared to the global hunger index, where India stands at the 97th position when it compared with the 117 countries in the world. So it is really, really, really alarming. But on the other side, we see over the years there has been serious, concentrated effort by the government of India to reduce this poverty and hunger, and which has already showed results. But the problem is the inequalities, the wide range of inequalities that is existing in the countries in the name of caste, in the name of minorities, or in the name of regional disparities, that still plays a very crucial problem when it comes to ensuring that every person, every human being in this country, every citizen in this country are given the equal access to the resources, especially after the globalization, where the wealth started accumulating in the concentration of wealth is on one place, and the other side, the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes and the people who are in the rural areas are being marginalized. And also, the globalization was giving priority to most the urban amenities. Whereas agriculture is having a backseat, and in India we are going through a great crisis, major crisis of farmer suicide. And farmer suicide that leads to reduced agriculture output, and again that continues to play a havoc in the sustainability of the food supply. And apart from that, when I work with children, I also see like almost 40% of the children are malnourished, undernutrition, wasted, stunted, so which is still a great concern, though we have, as a country, have made changes, moved from one level to the other, but we are still in an alarming position.
Very well. We're going to leave that as our final word. Unfortunately, it seems that we've only really touched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to these topics. There are a lot of aspects which have remained untouched, which we weren't able to get to, and we'll try to, of course, have all of these esteemed guests and experts back on for further discussion on this topic by topic, segment by segment. But of course, we appreciate all of their times. That was Professor Andrew Sesuraj, social worker, who was speaking to us live from Chennai. We also had Omar Madik, policy analyst at UNDP, who was right here in our studios in Lahore. We had Ms. Waqar Rizvi, social activist, who was speaking to us live from London. And we had Mr. Abdul Wadud, activist, who was joining us live from Kuwait as well. Now, viewers, just in conclusion, as I said before, thanking our guests, this really does seem like we've only touched the tip of the iceberg, but there are a lot of aspects here, aren't there? There's the government versus private sector aspect. There's the aspect of who gets the blame here, but is that really even the core issue? Isn't it about working together to resolve these issues actually, which should be coming to the fore instead of just pointing fingers and passing the buck on to somebody else? That's something that one of our guests said earlier as well. Keep a close eye, of course, on these developments going into 2019 as well. Stay with The Scope, though. That's been me, Waqar Rizvi, for now.